Yeah, Ine, let's get started. I know you have a welcome for us, and then
my apologies. I see the chat is disabled, but I see some answers in the Q&A.
Okay, all right. Okay, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Ina Sumartono. I'm one of the Speaks co-chairs along with Reta Petagisto and Wendy Jen Wong. Speak is a consortium of a K-8 member schools here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, powered by all volunteer board of parents and a few dedicated school administrators working together to bring you great speakers on topics that matter. Thank you everyone involved in making today's event happen. We really appreciate it. We are very excited to welcome all of you in this morning's event and experience the conversations between Valarie Kaur and Virginia Pack, the head of Live Oak School. One housekeeping item, there will be 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the presentations. Please submit your questions via Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to Virginia Pack, who will then introduce Valarie Kaur in a minute. Virginia has been an educator for over 25 years. She started at Live Oak School as a third grade teacher, and she has been the head of school at Live Oak for the past 10 years. Virginia embodies Live Oak's values of integrity, inclusivity, and empathy with joy and humor. This is evident every morning as she warmly greets each student by name to let them know to have arrived at the place where they belong. Virginia lives in San Francisco with her husband and her high school daughter. To that end, she made a diversity, equity, and inclusivity a cornerstone at Live Oak School. And now I'll be handing the screen, the floor, and the events to Virginia. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the conversation.
thank you so much, Ine, and to the entire Speak board for this wonderful opportunity. You do work tirelessly to bring us phenomenal wisdom through your work. So we're very, very appreciative. Thank you in particular to the leadership of Speak and to those who represent Live Oak School on the Speak board, Barb Morgenthau and Roseanne Berry. We were hoping to start this morning with a little bit of music. Valarie has inspired work by Annie DeFranco. An album has recently been released, so we encourage you to look for that as you find additional ways to carry on this morning's conversation in all kinds of platforms. So it is absolutely my privilege to introduce Valarie Kaur to you. She is a seasoned civil rights activist and a celebrated prophetic voice at the forefront of progressive change. Valarie burst into American consciousness in the wake of the 2016 election when her watch night service address went viral with 30+ million views worldwide. Her question, is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? Reframed the political movement and became a mantra for people fighting for change. Valarie now leads the Revolutionary Love Project to reclaim love as a force for justice in America. As a lawyer, filmmaker, innovator, I'd add poet and musician, she has won policy change on multiple fronts: hate crimes, racial profiling, immigration detention, solitary confinement, internet freedom, and more. She founded Groundswell Movement, Faithful Internet, and the Yale Visual Law School Project to inspire and equip new generations of advocates. Valarie has been a regular TV commentator on MSNBC and contributor to CNN, NPR, PBS, The Hill, Huffington Post, and The Washington Post. A daughter of Sikh farmers in California's heartland, Valarie earned degrees at Stanford University, Harvard Divinity School, and Yale Law School. Valarie's book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love, was released in 2020, some good news from 2020, and expands on her blockbuster TED Talk. Valarie Kaur has not abandoned her post. I am astounded by the expansiveness of her labors. Her story is humbling and hopeful. Valarie's here to talk with us about a path forward to heal our nation, calling upon us to see no stranger, to tend the wound, and to breathe and push. Thank you, Valarie, for your wisdom. I've devoured your book. I know many have. It's so nourishing in this time.
Oh, Virginia, thank you so much for having me. I just want to begin with so much gratitude to you, to the Speak board, the leadership that made this event possible, to all the educators and heads of school on the line, and all the parents on the line. I'm a parent to a kindergartner. My son is in virtual kindergarten downstairs right now with my daughter running, in circles around him. She's two years old. And so this is an impossible time. It's an impossible time as a parent, as an educator, as our country, as our world is in great transition. Just to get through each day is an effort. And so the fact that you've created this space for us to come together and be together and breathe together, my hope for each of you is that this hour is a space of breath and reflection. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Virginia.
Well, let's get right into a discussion that's inspired by your work. You have said that stories help us see no stranger, and have advised people to look at others and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. Can you talk more about this and how this relates to our role as individuals to bring about racial and political healing in our society?
Virginia, when I was a little girl, I was raised on the farmlands here in California, and my grandfather lived with me. And he saw the world through the eyes of wonder. And as a child, I saw the world through the eyes of wonder. The stars up above, the cows across the fence. I was growing up on farmland. And so this feeling of being at home in my body and at home in the world was my first memory of what it meant to be alive here on this earth. And that feeling of belonging, got severed very quickly. I was 6 years old. I was how old my son is now when I heard my first racial slur, and it was at school. It was in the schoolyard, and a little boy had run up to me, and I was sort of on my knees playing house. I was the baby, and my best friend was the mommy. And the little boy looked at me and said, "Get up, you black dog." And I wanted to interrupt him and say, no, but I'm playing a baby, not a dog. But his face was cruel. His eyes were narrow. And I realized that he was seeing me from an angle that I had never seen myself before. And my reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion. And I went home, and I remember crying in my grandfather's arms. And that's when he told me the story of my faith, my ancestors, and this call to love that has really come down through the centuries and all of our great wisdom traditions. This invitation that he was making me was like, no, don't let him take away your ability to see the world through the eyes of wonder. You, my love, are meant to look at the face of anyone and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. I will see you as sister. I will see you as brother. I will see you as sibling. Even if you hate me, even if you refuse to wonder about me, you cannot make me hate you. And so he invited me to wonder about the boy and wonder about what he had heard from his parents and his neighbors and what made him see through that particular lens, and not to let him change how I saw the world. And my grandfather, I come from a lineage of warriors. So when you said don't abandon your post, my grandfather said, my dear, don't abandon your post. And I was a little girl in 2 long braids, right? My grandfather saw me as a warrior. He said, don't abandon your post. Whatever you do, don't let anyone take you from the path of love. Virginia, my entire life since then has been this long struggle, this long, beautiful attempt to keep the promise that I made to my grandfather, to show up with love, to champion love, even in a time as dark and as dangerous as this. I have come to believe as I look at the world around us that that kind of love is revolutionary, and revolutionary love is the call of our times.
Thank you so much. It's very meaningful that your story starts, you share an initial story with us about your 6-year-old self. Because I think a lot of, we are parents of 6-year-olds in the audience. We are teachers of 6-year-olds in the audience. We are communities for 6-year-olds and all that are, and they're growing up with us. And your story reminds us of how important each moment in their lives is, how lasting it can be, how inspiring it can be, how hard it can be. Thank you for that.
That's right. I really believe that, wonder is our birthright. When we look at our children, they see the world through the eyes of wonder. They are wonderstruck. And for some children, it's nurtured and they're safe enough to continue and to let that be how they see the world all through their life. But for so many children, especially if they are Black or Indigenous or a child of color or queer or trans or whatever that marks them on the margins in our society, very early, that ability to wonder, to be open, to see themselves as part of a larger human family, that gets severed really early. And no, my teachers didn't know about the racial slur, right? When it happened when I was 6 years old. Like, what are the small moments that could, forever change a child? If my grandfather wasn't there, already that the voice of the boy was rising in my head, that they call it internalized depression, but it's really that voice that tells yourself like, I'm not enough. Like I'm make yourself small. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not white enough. I'm not beautiful enough. I'm not enough. And if we as parents and educators can catch those moments early and on, see the signs and make sure that voice doesn't get ingrained in a child early on, we can, like my grandfather did for me, we can retain the light, or help that light grow for children, for who we need to shine, in this era.
How do you think we ensure that space is there? You said the teachers didn't know, and if your grandfather wasn't there, you might not have shared. How do we as parents and educators make sure that our children know we're there for those stories?
Yeah. I think if you're intervening after the moment of bullying or harassment or hatred has happened, it's too late. You're sort of like trying to triage after the fact. The moment that should have been the intentional moment was before. It's the culture that one creates in a classroom. It's the climate that one creates in a school. And I think that, I went to a school that was predominantly white, and my brownness and my difference and my sickness was just, rendered invisible as if it didn't exist. There was a sort of fear that, or assumption that if we just told the story of whiteness as the norm, as the default, and we don't even and we say we are all one, that sameness is oneness. But no, you are a part of me I do not yet know means that there is multiplicity, there is difference, and there is a treasure chest of stories and ways of being and backgrounds and histories and struggles that we can invite into the classroom before that moment where that script, the script of white supremacy, gets programmed into so many children because it's just in the air. So a lot of educators approach me now saying, we've talked about love and diversity and inclusion in our schools, but what you're inviting us to do is to make it explicit, is to take what we are wanting to practice and actually showing us how to have a shared vocabulary about how to practice. And so that's the work that we're doing now with the Revolutionary Love Project, offering a framework, a compass for parents, for guardians, for educators to say, all right, this is how we practice revolutionary love together. This is how we make it the ethic of our school culture, our classroom, or our home.
We're talking about, thank you for that, how to start. Let's think about where we are now as a nation. We're not just starting. We have inequity, racism, injustice, atrocities that are woven into the fabric of our nation. White supremacy is a founding philosophy of our nation. They are part of our past and part of our present. And many of us look at our country and feel like we're more polarized than ever. People are angry. How do we reclaim this love as a means to fight injustice?
I want to spend a moment first describing the era that I believe that we are in. And I'll do it through a story. You know, on January 6th, I was watching the insurrectionists storm the Capitol building, and I was shaking, and my husband and I were holding each other and sobbing because my brother-in-law was trapped in the Capitol building. So we were watching, and he's a reporter on CNN. So we were watching, hoping, praying that these men, heavily armed men with the tattoos and the Confederate flags and the guns, wouldn't find him. What would they do if they found him? Not just a reporter, but a brown man. And so he was trapped in his office reporting for CNN from his office, and there would be long stretches of silence, and we would just be terrified until we could hear him report again. That's how we knew he was safe. So when he was actually being evacuated to an undisclosed safe location, that's when, Virginia, I could actually feel my body. And I'm like, oh, this is terror. This is terror. And this terror is familiar. How many times in the last 20 years, as a woman of color, as a Sikh woman, have I seen my loved ones in harm's way and felt helpless to protect them? White supremacist terror is as old as this soil, as this nation. What is new is that as this nation is becoming more and more a multiracial nation, those white supremacist forces have now become cannibalistic, right? Attacking the very seat of power that once gave it legitimacy. What were they trying to do? They were trying to stop a peaceful transfer of power to a diverse coalition of leaders who would see someone like me and my children as part of this country. And so those forces, the forces of white supremacy, the forces of tyranny and cruelty that we have seen gain power in the last few years, we're in a new era, and yet they're not going away. They are signs and symptoms of that we are in an era of transition in the United States. Within 25 years, the number of people of color will exceed the number of white people on the soil for the first time since colonization. So we are at a crossroads. You know, will we continue to teeter on the brink of a kind of civil war? You know, more images like what we saw on January 6th, a power struggle with those who would wish to return America to a past where only a certain class of white people hold dominion? Or will we begin to birth a nation that has never been, Virginia, a nation made up of other nations? The world hasn't seen such a nation, such an experiment. People from all over the world come to a place and then we're told we are one. That is a hard thing. That is birthing something new. Will we birth an America that is truly multiracial, multi-faith, multicultural, where we strive to see no stranger? That task, oh my loves, that task is the task of a lifetime, right? The next 25 years. So as parents who are bringing our children up in this time of transition, as educators who are giving students the thing that we must do, the thing that we are most needed to do is to give our young people the tools to be able to show up to their part in the labor of transitioning this country. Because here's the thing, it's going to take every single one of us. We need sound policies. We need strong government. We know that. And we know that sound government alone is not sufficient to transition this country. We need a shift in consciousness and culture. We need a revolution of the heart. And that is block by block work. That is heart to heart work. That is teaching our young people and modeling ourselves how to look upon the face of anyone and say, no, you are a part of me I do not yet know. We will no longer order our society by a hierarchy of human value. We are going to create here where we are, beloved community, just beloved community, wherever the worth and the equality and the dignity of every person is seen and celebrated. You know, imagine Imagine if our schools weren't just places that are equipped to teach kids about math and science and literature. What if you're also teaching your kids to walk out of those buildings one day knowing how to love each other, knowing how to stand up when others are in harm's way, knowing how to respond to their opponents with love, knowing how to love themselves? You know, revolutions don't just happen in these big, grand public moments. They happen in the spaces where people come together to inhabit a new way of being. So all of you who are, running a household with children, who are leading schools with so many students and staff, and I see you as on the front lines. You are the midwives to a nation in transition. And we need you now. We need you to show up with the ethic of love, even when it's hard. Because when you're laboring with love, you're holding up a vision of a nation that leaves no one behind. And I want to say one more thing, because I know how hard it is when at the end of that day on January 6th, when my brother-in-law was finally safe, I got a call from my teammate. And, she's helped me build the Revolutionary Love Project, right? She's been my, friend by my side for the last 4 years. And she said, Valarie, I am so sorry. My parents were at the Capitol, but on the outside of the building. So my brother-in-law is on the inside. Her parents are on the outside. And Dr. King's words that we are part of this single garment of human destiny, I saw it. As much as I want to hate those people, as much as I want to see them as monsters for everything that they are doing to us, have done to us, I have to see them through the eyes of their daughter, who see them not as evil. There's no such thing as monsters in this world. There are only human beings who are wounded, who are doing what they're doing out of their own misinformation, out of the racial impulses that have been fueled by those in office, who are rising out of their own pain. So much of white nationalist aggression is a symptom of unresolved grief. They're grieving the notion that this country ever belonged just to them in the first place. Somebody's got to tend to those wounds. It's probably not going to be me, but it might be her. It might be their daughter. So when I say revolutionary love is the call of our times, I am declaring that revolutionary love must be practiced in community, and that we all have different roles in that labor. And I define revolutionary love as the choice to labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. Some of us got to love on ourselves right now. Like in the last few weeks, I had to deal with my family's trauma around, really, really feel the protection and safety that we need. Some of us have got to love on others. So reach out in solidarity, all the people who've decided to come and support us, right? And some of us are positioned to reach out to those neighbors, those relatives, those friends who we consider opponents, and start that deep and hard work of being in relationship. Because if we leave them alone, who's going to find them? Who's going to radicalize them? Isolation is the precondition for radicalization, right? But relationship is the precursor for transformation. And that is long labor, and that is hard labor, and it is ongoing labor. But imagine, Virginia, if we think about our job is to take America as a whole across the threshold. We can't leave 70 million people behind, right? Or whatever. What does it mean for us to invite everyone into a vision of a nation that leaves no one behind, not even them? That's what I mean by revolutionary.
Well, thank you so much for that. Our homes and our schools are places where love belongs. I remember you saying that as a lawyer, it was harder for you to start with love, but certainly
Yeah.
we don't have that excuse in our homes and in our schools.
Well, I do want to just pause on this, right? Because I have to tell you, anytime that anyone made a speech, was love is the answer, I would be the one to roll my eyes. Like, what? Like thoughts and prayers in the face of institutions of injustice and oppression that have gone on for hundreds of years. Like, what? How is that? And I realized, after the 2016 election, when hate violence was just skyrocketing, I just become a mother. I felt, I just went into a crisis. Like, what was it all for if my son, who's, wears long hair as part of our faith, what was it all for if he's growing up in a nation more dangerous for him than it was for me? So I had this moment of crisis, and I left the country. I had the privilege to take a year to write and think, and we went to the rainforest with my family and my son, and we were safe. And oh, Virginia, it felt like the womb. Like it was warm and it was wet and it was safe, and it was like being in the womb of the earth. And it was there when I began to read, the stories from my life, the stories of the past, and I began to see these patterns and practices, and the word love came to the surface. I'm like, love. And I realized, like, the problem is not with love, it's how we've talked about it in our society. The reference point for love is this romantic love. It's pop songs and Hallmark cards, right? Valentine's Day is around the corner. We think of the red roses. I really do like the roses, and the chocolates. I really do like the chocolates. But if romantic love is our only reference point for love, then we're missing a whole lot. I mean, think about what you do with your kids, right? Love is not a simple rush of good feeling. Love is all of the emotions. Right? Love is labor. It's fierce. And every day, what we're doing for our babies, it's fierce, it's bloody, it's imperfect, it's life-giving. It's a choice we have to make every day to love like that. And it contains all the emotions, right? Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger, rage, rage is the force that protects that which is loved. And, I say when we feel like we've reached our limit, then wonder again. I have to wonder about my babies every day in order to figure out how to love them. I have to wonder about my husband every day to figure out what he needs. The day I stop wondering, the day I'm too tired to wonder, I miss the mark. But the good news is that you can always return to wonder as a practice. You don't have to lead with empathy. You don't have to lead with compassion. When my baby is screaming, I don't need to feel empathy in that moment. I don't have to feel as she feels. I know. I just have to wonder about her. Why is she screaming? What does she need? What does she want? And the thing about this is that when you are leading with wonder, when your laborer for love leads with wonder, then your children watch it. They see it, they learn it. If love is labor, it can be modeled, it can be taught, it can be practiced. And I'll just give you one illustration. It was a summer of racial reckoning last year, and I was writing and I had to find a place. It's pandemic. I had to find a place where my children couldn't find me. So I locked myself in the closet, but it didn't have a lock. I just closed the door really hard. In my closet, I'm writing. And my son comes in once, twice, 3 times, finds me. Mommy, where's the tape? Mommy, where's the stapler? Mommy, where's the... And finally, I just snap at him like, Cubby, I'm writing. I can't be interrupted. What I'm doing is very important. Right? And the next thing I know, I hear a swish under the door, and it's like this red piece of paper, and it's in the shape of a fish. I'm like, what? And I think it says the word you can't quite spell. So it's like Valentine. I was like, is this a Valentine? And it's like June. So I find him, like, Gubby, what did you do? And he says, well, I made you a Valentine. I'm like, why? And he says, well, I noticed that mommy wasn't being her best self. And so I thought, what does mommy need? What does mommy want? And I made you a Valentine. Oh, Virginia, our children learn, He had to wonder. He had to wonder what I needed. And then his labor, he showed up to do that one thing for me. So what does it mean in the small ways, and in the big ways? To show up with love as labor.
Thank you so much. It's an adorable, and deeply meaningful story, as all of yours are. Is there anything else? We'll talk about. Well, let's move on to our children, and because you've spoken a lot about the parent's role. So you've mentioned you are a parent of 2 children. We're certainly lucky to have you as a mama. And you speak in your work about needing swords and needing shields to do this work. what do you believe is appropriate, the appropriate swords, the appropriate shields for children who are in elementary school, for children who are in middle school, to be positioned to be this warrior for,
Mm,
for justice?
mm. I think it's voice. It's voice. And the voice happens in different. It could be their ability to speak and to tell story and to express emotion, to find language for all that unsayable life, right? All the struggle, the experiences, to be able to make meaning, to find voice. And sometimes that'll be orally, others it'll just be for them to be able to find it on the page through writing. It could also be through their artwork and the art making. I really think that encouraging our children to take, that if they see the world through the eyes of wonder and to take that in, to begin to process it and finding their voice at this age, that's all that's needed. That's all that's needed. And especially if it's in a relation, if it's in relationship, if it's in community where they're showing up and learning how to listen to the stories and the struggles and the experiences of other. That's social emotional learning, isn't it? That's how we build beloved community that's rooted in wonder, that's practicing love. I have this framework in my books, Stranger, with these 10 core practices of revolutionary love and loving others. This practice of seeing no stranger, it begins with wonder. Then when you wonder about another, you might have to let their story into their heart, and that might be hard. You might have to let their grief into your heart. And so teaching children how to be brave with grief, their own grief and another's, to sit with that discomfort, not to try to fix it, but to try to just bear it. That's what it means to be in relationship with community, right? And then the fight is what do you do with that information, is like, how do you fight for others? And yes, I talk about swords and shields. I use these warrior metaphors as well as birthing metaphors, but I use these warrior metaphors because I think this idea of equipping children with tools to fight the good fight, to stand up for themselves and others, is so important. I think voice is the most essential to me.
Some of those, you talk about those, this listening, helping children hear and listen to the stories, the stories of struggle. Some of these stories are so painful, and as parents, we are often feel like our most important job is to protect our children from pain. How do you think about that? How do you help parents understand how to lead children through what is to be painful if we're listening to these stories of struggle, to ours and others?
Yeah, it's learning that discomfort isn't a bad thing. That discomfort is always the starting point of transformation. I'm writing a children's book right now that's, revolutionary love for babies. And it's a song I sing to my daughter every night. And I'm going to give you just a couple of verses because I think it answers this question. It begins with wonder about the world, like ants on a leaf, birds in the sky, sweet little bee, trees so high. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know. So it's a wonder for the earth. But what do you do when you wonder about other people? People walk by, faces are new, so many colors, points of view. Where have they been? What have they seen? Their stories show me everything. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know. And now this answers your question. Sad stories make me turn away, but I keep listening, I get brave. I speak, I march, I dance, I sing. Justice is what we can bring. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know. So, right, sad stories make me turn away. It's okay, my love. It's okay. Like, oh, this doesn't feel good, mommy. It's really like I'm teaching my son about indigenous people and the Tongva people of this land. And every time he like, oh, mommy, I don't want to get to the cruelty part. You know, it's hard. And so I back off because it's just a little bit. You just get a little bit. And then because you want to turn away, but I keep listening. When he's ready, can you keep listening, my love? Because in every story of oppression or injustice, it's not the center. It doesn't always happen, but there are always people on the margins who come in to cut down the lynching noose, you know, to show up to say, not in my name, who stand in solidarity with people who do not look like them. Right? I speak, I march, I dance, I sing. Justice is what we can bring. And there are stories all through the centuries of people who had no obvious reason to love each other, who come together to grieve together and fight for one another. And that's given birth to revolutions, new relationships and revolutions. You know, we can sing it and we can say it, and we can tell stories about it, and that's all required. But I really think that the way that children most understand this is when we do it. And they see us do it. They see us do it. You know, before the pandemic, I was in Tijuana. I'm a lawyer. I was working in an asylum clinic. I was sitting with mothers who had babies who looked like mine, fleeing persecution. It was horrific. And I just had to tell my son a little bit, you know, he's seeing what his mommy was doing. But you might say, well, I'm not a civil rights lawyer. What can I do? I'm like, during the pandemic, we took my son and we're like worked with a homeless advocacy organization, and down our street, you know, there's a line of tents. What does it mean to like wonder about them, wonder when it's hard? What is it like to sleep in a tent at night? What is it like not to know where your next meal is coming from? Can we show up and say, you are sister, brother, I'm going to give you this offering and hear your story, right? Like the more they see us doing it, the easier. And you might say, oh, that sounds nice, but I am exhausted. I'm working night. I know. Like I'm 5:30 a.m. baby's asleep, you know, 9 p.m. son is awake, and I'm just laboring every minute. You know, I have care 6 hours a day. So I have so I can be here and do this. And it's nonstop, and I get it. And what I want to say is that it doesn't have to be all the time. You know, just where you can and how you can to model for your children the way that you see the world and the way that you act on on the way that you see the world. That seeps into them, that forms them, that shapes them. And when you're tired, it's hard to wonder. It's hard, but that's the labor, that's the choice. Okay, if the pandemic is hard for me, what might it be for that family or that community? And what is some small way I can show up now and my kids can, and we can do something small together? Those 1,000 small acts like that teach children an orientation to the world that is anchored in love.
You anticipate so many of the questions. For those of us who aren't civil rights lawyers, how do we make it part of our days, or even if it can't be all the time? What else do we see in our days that we can point out to our children?
I think that, you know, when you you know, I'm going to invite you all to go to seenostranger.com. When you go to seenostranger.com, you'll see my book, but then you'll see a learning hub in the corner. And you don't even have to have the book to access the learning hub. We've just released it this week. It's a learning hub that's free and available, and it's bringing to life all these 10 practices of love and giving you ideas for how to practice them. And Virginia, we've spent the last 4 years creating this beautiful educator's guide, also free, also available for any educator to take and teach in their classroom. And part of that framework, you know, is inviting people into a way of being, a way of moving in the world. I think there's a lot of the really good work around anti-racism, you know, and I'm so proud of that work. And I think so many people, you know, they're reading the books, you know, they're trying to say the right things, and it's like an idea that they're trying to hold in their mind, right? And it's a you know, can I say and do the right things to be anti-racist? And we need those models, but how do we take that and integrate it into our emotional life, the rest of our body, the way that we are just showing up and moving through each day? And this invitation to orient to the world through revolutionary love means that any given moment, there are moments where you will be in a position where you can love on others who need you, who are in harm's way. There will be moments where you'll find an opponent in front of you. So what are the tools you're going to use to love that opponent? There will be moments when you're like, I can barely take a breath. I need to love on myself. So loving others, opponents, ourselves, that sometimes I do that throughout the course of a single day and oftentimes through a week and sometimes through a season of your life. And the discernment about like, how do I need to show up? What are you can come to me and I can give you like 4 or 5 ideas, go to these organizations, donate to those places, show up at these marches. But truly, there's a voice deep inside of you. You are the best person to know. The brave, the brave next thing that you are ready to do now and next. Maybe it's something on the periphery that you haven't quite oriented to and wondered about. Maybe it's a thought you keep having, but you haven't quite taken the step. What's holding you back? It's probably fear and fatigue. So who in your life, who are your accomplices? Who are your midwives? Who are people who can come to your side and say, all right, let's breathe together. Okay, what's your push? What's the way that you can push yourself just a little bit and then breathe again before you show up to the next thing again? I call that voice in me wise woman. And Audre Lorde, great Black feminist, says, we can learn to mother ourselves, right? We can learn to mother ourselves. Like I would go to mother figures in my life to tell me what to do. And I finally learned how to get quiet enough to listen to the voice of the wise woman in me. She knows, I know, okay, now you rest, my love. Now you drink the tea. Now you show up, then you rest again just for a few seconds before the children come over you. And then this is what you're going to do as they're reviewing the MPP program at the border. And this is what you're going to do as the farmers are protesting in India. And it's not, it's a discernment, it's a listening that involves breathing and then pushing and then breathing again. But if you're developing that voice of wisdom inside of you, which I go into at length in the book, then it becomes easier to know, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? Where can I show up now and next?
Yes, and I can imagine talking with children about, which love are we giving and which love do we need to be doing now to build that awareness? Is this in this moment, in this time, do we need to be loving ourselves? Do we need to be loving others? Do we need to be loving our opponents?
Yes. It's a really simple framework. And yeah. My children are like, okay, if they can get it, then I know it's working.
We have a few questions I'm just going to check in with our other moderators. Is this time for me to go to some of the questions that are in the chat? I get a heads up from, let's see. Well, let's try it. Oh, sorry, not yet. So they want me to, I'll go back to some of the other questions that we had prepared. Sorry, Ine. You speak of progress as a labor. Social justice work is pushing through the pain of this era to birth a new future. You said at the beginning, this is our great transition. Many of us want to help birth that new future. As we think about our role in this fight, as individuals, as parents, and for our children, what do you see are some of the most important takeaways from all that you have discussed today?
I invite you simply to take a Post-it note. If you do nothing else, take a Post-it note and write the words breathe and push on them. And then just put it on your desk or wherever you spend the most time, and you can just glance at it. And the reason is there is wisdom about the breathing and the pushing that I think is useful for all of our labors in life. And I'll spend a moment explaining why I use birthing metaphors. We say to each other, warrior on, soldier on. Look how easily you ask me, what does it mean to be a warrior? Everybody got it, right? Only a subset of mostly men have had the experience of actually going to war. And yet when we say those things, we know what we mean, the courage to fight the good fight. So too, only a subset of women have given birth in the particular way that I'm describing it. There's so many ways to give birth. And yet there's something that is useful about that specific experience in the way the midwife guides that birthing process. She doesn't say breathe once and push the rest of the way. She says, breathe, my love, then push, then breathe again, then push, and then breathe again. There's a wisdom about how to maintain strength and stamina and resilience in a long labor. So if warrioring is about protecting and defending, right, then birthing is about nurturing and creating new life and new possibilities. The ability to create and nurture is not a biological right, it is a human right. Each of us has the ability to imagine our labors, the labor of raising a family, the labor of running a school, the labor of birthing a nation. We need to last in those labors. We need to find longevity in those labors. And as a civil rights activist, for me, I just thought I measured my success by how hard I pushed, just push until I, collapsed. I wasn't going to last. I wasn't going to find longevity. And it's only in the last some years that I've taken this birthing metaphor and asked myself, all right, breathe and push. How am I breathing every day? How am I breathing every day? And sometimes it's really small. Like before joining you, I took a moment and I the tea that you all sent me, I'd close my eyes. I took that one sip of tea and just tasted. That was my breath. The thing I needed to then do my little push with you all. And then there's going to be another breath after this, right? And sometimes it can be seconds of solitude, right? Before I open that door and the children pounce on me and the baby's nursing and just looking up at the sky and just smiling and just feeling, what it's like to be here alive now before I turn the doorknob and let them come like that. That can be the breath. It might be over the weekend, we have a practice in our house called Timeless Day, where my son physically hides my phone for 24 hours where I cannot find it. And that is our breathe in the course of the week, in the course of the month, in the course of a season. How are you weaving breathing between the pushing? And what happens when we weave breath in like that is that even on the hardest days, even on the darkest days, joy is possible. When we breathe like that, we create the conditions to drop into the present moment, the feeling of being here alive now. And when we drop into the present moment and we awaken our senses to everything that is good or beautiful, wondrous around us, then joy can find us more easily. I know it's hard to talk about joy these days. I'm someone who has survived police brutality, sexual assault. I've worked in prisons. I've been at the site of mass shootings. I've had family members, community members killed in hate crimes. I always felt guilty in letting myself have moments of pleasure or joy. And it took me a long time to understand that, oh no, the labor for justice has gone on long before I was born. It will continue after I die. So what does it mean to make this era of transition that we're all supposed to show up in? What does it mean to make the labor that we show up to an end in itself? And I've discovered that when we're laboring with love, when we're showing up with love for others, for our opponents, for ourselves, when we're just moving, swimming in that as a way of being, when we're weaving breath throughout that process, then joy comes more easily. And I've come to believe that laboring for a more just and beautiful world for ourselves and for our children and their children with love and with joy, laboring with joy is the meaning of life.
It's beautiful. Thank you. I think I'm so glad you spoke about joy, because I wonder if sometimes we feel guilty feeling joy when we're faced with such joyless circumstances.
I know. I didn't understand that joy. I was like, oh, joy, that's secondary, that's luxury. And I didn't understand how it was essential until, the night of the 2016 election. For me, it felt like all was lost, and I was watching the results come in. I could feel, it felt like death in the body. And my son, at that point, he was almost 2. He was like, dance time, mommy? Dance time? And, I have these practices in our home. So I'm like, we're going to dance every night. And I look at my husband, I'm like, not tonight. And he's like, your rules. So I'm like, oh, so we turn down the news and we turn up the music, and it's, baby, you're a firework. And in the beginning, I'm like a zombie. I don't want to be there. I feel dead inside. And then the next thing I hear, boom, 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 even brighter than the moon. moon, moon. And my son is leaping into my arms. And he's like, throw me up, mommy. And I'm like, I throw him up and he's like laughing. And then I'm laughing and he's dancing and I'm dancing. And we are dancing, Virginia, we were dancing on one of the darkest nights of our lives. And after I put him down to sleep, I noticed this energy like sparkling, like rising in my body. And I'm like, oh, what is this? This is joy. Joy returns us to everything that is good and beautiful and worth fighting for. Joy gives us energy for that long labor. There's a song we just played at the People's Inauguration by the Resistance Revival Chorus saying, it's called This Joy. And it's like, this joy of mine, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. It's an act of sovereignty to say, no, joy. And the last year, the darkest days of this pandemic, even when we've lost people, even on the night of the insurrection, we still had dance time in our house. We still danced with our children. Don't let anything take away the joy of their childhood and your right to enjoy what is real, what is good, what is beautiful, what is right here. That's how we last too, Virginia, right? Laboring for a more just and beautiful world with joy. That makes for a whole life, a complete life, no matter how hard it gets. Joy is still possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Will you take some questions from the audience now?
Of course. I wanted to chat with them. I didn't realize the chat was disabled. So I was like, yeah, all of you who are here, thank you. And I'm ready to hear your questions.
So this one is, what is scripted? What is a scripted response that we as parents and educators can suggest to our children that they reply with when they are hurt by insensitive comments, by bullying, or witness such a comment, to empower them so that they're not frozen in the moment? How do we give our kids tools to stand up?
I think that is a beautiful thing to develop with them. If we're talking about voice, then what is the thing that feels authentic to them, that they feel like they can say, be primed to say? And I think it's different if they're the person receiving the harm or if they're witnessing someone receiving the harm. If they're witnessing someone receiving the harm, we know that the best thing is to go to the side of that person and lead them away and just be their best friend, even if you don't know them, and just walk away with them, almost like not even engaging the bully, not even just carrying them away as if they were your sister, little sister or brother. If you're the person receiving the harm, then what are the words that feel authentic to the child that makes them feel like they are in their voice and in their power? And you can decide what that is, and that's going to be age appropriate according to how old your child is. But what a beautiful exercise to begin with now. And the truth is, Black, Indigenous, brown mothers have to do this work early. I heard my first racial slur at 6. My son heard it at 4. And I'm just, and I think everyone's realizing this now, that it's not just up to parents of color to have these conversations now. We need all parents. We need white parents to sit with their children now and give them, prime them for what to do and how they want to be when they witness those things happen to others. I do have like one, I want to get to more questions, but I do have one story that I feel like I really ought to tell. It was about my son's first racial slur. He was 4 years old. He was sitting on the shoulders of my father, and they were coming home from a concert in the park, and they wanted to cross the marina on a ferry to get home, and it was a special day, so my father said yes. And while they were waiting for the boat to arrive, they heard a very irate voice, like a woman was in an argument with the ferry conductor. And my father is so kind, he's just so generous. So it's like, oh, excuse me, would you like to, I have the schedule, you can find a different way. And this woman spun around, took one look at my father, and then said it, go back to the country you came from. Almost like she was like reaching from the air. It was so immediate, right? Split second. And my father is now growing hard of hearing. So my son had to tell my father what the woman had said. This went on for a while, and my parents came home shaking. And I said, well, didn't anyone say anything? There was a group of people watching, and they didn't say anything in the moment. They came afterwards and said, oh, I'm so sorry, that shouldn't have happened. But in the moment, they were frozen, right? And I keep thinking, if that woman, if this is on the words of the president, the then president, it's scribbled on the sides of our gurdwaras and our temples, and it's in the air. That woman only had to do this to hurl it at my father, to like an arrow. Like, the rest of us have to be just as primed, right? To stand up. All they had to do was come to my father's side as if he was their father, and as if my son was their son, and walk away with them. That's all. But everyone was too frozen. And that night I felt I was so twisted up, Virginia. I was so angry. And I asked my son, and this is something you might want to do, what do you feel in your body? Mommy, I feel sad. Okay, where do you feel the sadness in your body? I feel it in my belly. Okay, what shape is it? What color is it? What is it like? Exploring it, right? Not suppressing it, not saying it's bad, just exploring that emotion. And then, okay, my love, I'm going to kiss it. How does it feel? Oh, like, Mommy, it's like moving around. Like, oh, okay. What if I kiss over here? What if I kiss your hair? It's like, oh, it's okay. Like, so it was like helping him breathe and push, right? Helping him just process, feel the discomfort, feel the kiss. You're just processing, moving through the emotion. He's starting to fall asleep, and my mind was racing. I was just, how am I going to protect my child? How am I going to protect my parents? How, should we move? Where do we move? And suddenly I see my son puts his ear on my mouth. I'm like, he says, Mommy, I not hear you breathing. And he says, Mommy, you have to breathe to sleep. And then he says, just breathe and push, Mommy. Just breathe and push. Virginia, I honestly didn't know my son had any idea what I did in the world. I didn't know he even heard the words that I say to people. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, my son has become my midwife. I don't think we have to have all the answers. I don't think we have to have the right scripted words all the time. I think we can be in a co-creative process with our children, that we can trust their inherent wisdom, listen to them with, the ears of wonder, ask them what they think needs to be said or heard or felt in that moment. And in that moment, my son gave me exactly what I needed. We were breathing together, and then I could fall asleep so I could wake up to the next day's push.
Thank you so much. And you in answering that question, you went back to the very beginning where you talked about your 6-year-old story, and we asked about what can schools and families do, and you said we'll get there before that story happens.
Yes.
So we know this is going to come up for our kids. We know they're going to see this in the world. We know they're going to hear this in the world. Let's talk to them about what they can do.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, here's a pandemic one. Families are splitting like crazy in COVID-19. Is it so that the cracks in the relationships need a new direction? Is it the case that this, it just moved. Is it the case that this transition to a better way of relating? I think it's talking about divisions in families.
Yeah.
In this time.
Hard. It's hard. I mean, my husband and I are so in love with each other. We've, been together for 17 years. And I don't think there's been a time in our partnership that has been more strained than this one. And it's because the stress of each day and keeping our family safe, keeping each other safe, just the labor of running the house, not having enough care. My parents always lived with us. That's how we've been co-raising our children. And I haven't seen my mother in almost a year. I haven't touched her. My children haven't touched her. My husband's a director. He hasn't directed in a year. Who's a director that cannot direct? We're lucky. We're one of the lucky ones. Like, we haven't lost our house. Like, we have health insurance. Like, we have resources and we have support. And if we are having a hard time, if this is the hardest time in our relationship, then oh my loves, if you're going through a hard time, that's probably because you are awake and aware of this unprecedented time. And I know it's been so long that we've kind of found a new normal, but this is not, this is strain for everyone. And for some couples, it's harder than others. For some families, it's harder than others. And what I wish to tell you is that, yes, the cracks are exposed more so. Like, okay, for us, like maybe the labor, anyway, I don't have to go into the details, but like, oh, okay, maybe these are things that have been happening before and now they're really exposed. And it's just unmet needs. Like, what are his unmet needs and what are my unmet needs? And that's been really exposed during this time of pandemic. And it is an opportunity to see those needs and to maybe take steps that you had never taken before. It took me way too long to learn that just spending time as a family wasn't the same as spending time with my husband. I just thought that, like, we're together. Of course we're together. We're together with the children, but both of us are just looking at the children. We're not looking at each other. And we can go for weeks and weeks and weeks without just even looking into each other's eyes for longer than 5 seconds and giving our full attention to each other. And I didn't realize that until pandemic. It's like, oh, we're gonna, the practice of wonder. Like, when am I actually protecting time and space to wonder about how my husband is? He doing the same for me. So we started this really simple practice of dinner vacations. We can't go out anywhere. We haven't left the house in 11 months. But every Friday night, that's our one night where we order food from outside. My son watches Winnie the Pooh. My daughter's asleep. We sit in our backyard and we have dinner and we dress up and we pretend like we've gone on to a fancy restaurant, and we look at the stroller and we're like, oh, look at that beautiful piece of public art. And we laugh and we don't talk about logistics. We don't talk about anything else. We're just letting ourselves breathe, right? And to drop into the wonder of the present moment, look around at the lights, in the garden and the sky. And then I suddenly, oh, I feel his hand. How foreign. Oh, it's soft. It's nice. It's warm. Like, that's it. That's it. If you are someone who wants to stay with your partner and wants to keep your family together, just create the small little moments in a week. It's night for us, it's 90 minutes for a week, and it's just keeping the foundation of our marriage intact and strong until we can weather this tempest, and get to calmer waters. It's going to be turbulent for a while. So my loves, like, this is not like, oh, divorce now because, unless there's really good reason to, right? But if you want to stay with your person, how can you weather the tempest together? And trust that in this new era to come, yes, there's going to be great challenges, but on the other side of this pandemic, when there's enough collective will from our leadership and our communities, that there will be moments where it won't feel as hard, as devastating as this, and your children are watching you. Your children are watching you, and that doesn't mean that you have to hide how hard it is. No, they're watching how you are finding resilience in this time. And that means it's okay to cry, it's okay to grieve, it's okay to rage, and then you return, right? It's not the rupture, it's the repair. You return and hold each other and cry together and breathe through it together and dance together. You're teaching them resilience in this era. It's not deprivation, you're teaching them resilience. And that is going to be helpful to them for this entire era of transition that we're in.
Thank you. Can you tell us how your faith has informed your philosophy? As a Punjabi Sikh woman, I think the concept of Chardi Kala and oneness is so inspiring.
Yes. So when I talk about joy, I take it from my faith tradition. In Sikhi, it's called Chardi Kala, ever rising joy, even in darkness. Ever rising spirits, right? Ever rising joy, even in the midst of the labor, the pain of labor. So Chardi Kala, the farmers who are protesting in India right now in the face of tear gas cannons and police brutality and an oppressive government, they are still saying to each other, are you in Chardi Kala? Are you allowing that joy to come and be a buoyant, rising energy for you? So when I talk about joy, it's definitely deeply shaped by this concept of joy that's come down through my lineage. When I talk about love, it's the same thing. Guru Nanak is the founder of the Sikh faith, and his vision is Ik Om God. 550 years ago, Ik Om God, oneness, that we are one, that we belong to one another. But it was a oneness rooted in wonder, right? When he had this vision, he was struck with vismad, ecstatic wonder. And he saw the world through the eyes of wonder, and he began to singing songs of oneness. And those songs became our scripture. So our scripture is not stories or sermons, it's all poetry. It's devotional poetry. And when singing those poems, you're supposed to return to this feeling of like being in wonder of the world around you. And that wonder is the starting point for love. And Papaji used to say, my grandfather, love is dangerous business, right? Because if I wonder about you, if I see you as my sister or brother, then I have to stand up for you when you're in harm's way. I have to fight for you. Even if you're not part of my immediate family, that's what it means to have love without limit. And so Sikhs became Sant Sipahi, sage warriors or warrior sages. The sage, the warrior fights, the sage loves. It's a path of revolutionary love. So and so much, and it's ancient, right? Like, oh, Jesus called to love thy neighbor, Muhammad to take in the orphan, Abraham to open your tent to all, Mirabai to love without limit. It came down to me through my faith in this particular way, through Guru Nanak, through my grandfather. But this idea of love without limit, this idea of revolutionary love is ancient, and it's our greatest inheritance. And we just have never lived in a society where those of us who hold these convictions are the ones who are leading us, right? And we live in societies that are dominated by institutions that cling to hierarchies of human value. But this is a time, this era of transition is a time for us to reject hierarchies of human value. It's a time for those of us who lead with love, see no stranger, to be the ones who start to practice this in our schools, in our workplaces, our industries, our homes. And if enough of us do it here, right? If enough of us do it here, then we can teach the country, show the country how to do it at large. There's this amazing data coming out of Harvard around social change and how 3.5% of a population, when they engage in a nonviolent action, it creates change throughout an entire society. So Virginia, those are our marching orders, right? Can we equip, inspire, catalyze 11 million people in the United States to practice revolutionary love here, and here? Might that be the catalyzing that helps take the nation as a whole across the threshold? I'm going to be in the labor for 25 years. We had the People's Inauguration. That was my oath, that I'm not going to go away. I'm not going to be a woman of color who takes her life or allows her life to be taken, that I want to last. And now I know how to last because of the breathing and the pushing. And my particular role is to hold up this love ethic. And so that means I'm not going anywhere, everyone. If you feel like this is something you want to take into your life, now I'm here. If this is something you want to take into your life a year from now, I'm here. Everything that we're creating is aimed to help educators and parents and community leaders take the love ethic and put it into practice in this new generation, in this new time. And everything that we're building is at seenostranger.com. And we'll continue as we build to continue to put things there for you all to use and make your own. And I'm going to say one last thing. If anything I'm saying is resonating with you, it's because it's touching upon a wisdom that's already inside of you. I'm talking about love, like as if it's new. Like, love is not new. This is ancient stuff. I'm just kind of re-offering it for a new time. So if it's speaking to you, it's because it's already here. It's in your blood, it's in your bones, it's your inheritance. And so what does it mean to like recover this beautiful thing that's already in you and lead with it? And that's what I want to be here to help with.
Well, you asked if we could mobilize that many people, and I think with you in the work, there's no doubt that could happen.
Yes. I think so too.
Well, I think we have one last question here that's a lot more questions, but one that I feel is very important, and I know you have important things to say to it. Why should someone from an oppressed, marginalized community practice revolutionary love towards their oppressor, especially during times when it feels like there's no emotional energy left to do that?
Yeah. The answer is you're right. You are absolutely right. If you are someone who has a knee on your neck right now, it is not your role to look up at your oppressor and try to wonder about them or try to love them. No, your job is to stay alive. Your job is to take the next breath. Your job is to love yourself, to let love in, right? Revolutionary love is love for others, opponents, ourselves. That's your revolutionary act to manage here. But if you are someone who is safe enough or brave enough to look at those kinds of opponents and sit with them and tend to them and transition them, try to love them, then we need you now, right? So I think the task for those of us who are like feeling are inside of our trauma and inside of our rage is to simply give permission to the other people who are in a position by virtue of their privilege to do that kind of work. And that is enough, right? Sometimes declaring revolutionary love for opponents, it feels more aspirational than a reality, but simply the aspiration is revolutionary love because you are refusing to let anyone make you dehumanize them. And honestly, that has always been freeing for me. Anytime that I've sat with my opponents and I've seen them as like, it could be the police officer who hurt me or the white supremacist who took Balbir Singh Sodhi, an uncle in our community, or it could my own abuser. Anytime I refused to dehumanize them and understood why they hurt me, they melted from becoming one-dimensional monsters who had supreme power over me into frail and wounded human beings. It was actually an act of liberation for me. It was part of my healing process. But sometimes that takes a long time. It took me, 20 years to see my assailant in the aftermath of sexual violence, to see him as a person and not as a monster. I hated him for that long, and I needed it. He asked me to forgive him just a few years after, and I was like, "You're going to take something else from me?" No, I needed to withhold my forgiveness because it was the only thing that I had. But after all this time of tending to my trauma and tending to my rage and tending to my grief, there came a point, 2 decades later, where I looked at this hate and I realized, like, oh, I don't need this anymore. And my revolutionary, I could forgive him. And my revolutionary act was to let others in my family love on him and get him to the point where he could apologize to me. And now we are reconciled. 20 years later, I never thought it would be possible, right? But if you imagine that everyone has a different role in the labor, then it gives everyone space and time, to enter a long journey of transformation. But in the meantime, yes, keep yourself safe. In the meantime, make sure that your own health and wellness and safety is protected. And that's why this idea of community, who are your accomplices, who will conspire with you to make that happen, is so, so essential. I hope that's helpful. And I tell these stories in full in the book, but yeah.
I can't speak for the person who answered the question, but it was certainly helpful from my perspective, and I can imagine it was. Valarie, thank you so much for your time this morning. Let me just double check to make sure I've got this timing right. I think we're supposed to be done at 11:15. Can someone make sure that's true? Yes. You challenged us to, yes, you challenged us to join your movement, and I myself have already put up the words breathe and push in my space. I'm with you. I think you have many others in the Bay Area community who are joining your legacy.
Oh, thank you, Virginia. I'm looking at all these questions. I wish I could speak to each one of them. I do have to say that a lot of this is answered on our Learning Hub. And because we've just released it, I'm really, really excited for you all to take it and run with it and explore it. And seenostranger.com, and you'll see the Learning Hub in the corner and the Educator's Guide that we have created. And it's all for you. Right now, the Educator's Guide has been crafted for high school, college, and adult learners, but we do have a working group of educators at the elementary school and pre-K level who are also developing tools with us. So in the coming year, I think the next stage of evolution for us is to develop more and more tools that are tailored to you. And we can only do that. I'm not in the classroom. You're on the front lines, right? You know what you need. And so Virginia, I would love to speak to you afterwards, maybe others afterwards, about how we can be sure we're continuing to create things that support what is already working for you and what you want to go deeper with. So yeah, let's stay in community with one another, everybody.
Absolutely. And to all of our attendants, thank you so much for joining us. Valarie is going to transition now to a conversation with the heads of school, of your children's school. So myself included, I'm very excited. So we will definitely talk about what can we do? What can we do together? Thank you again to the leadership of Speak. We are so grateful for the wisdom that you find in our community and the way in which you bring us all together in shared pursuit of issues of equity, inclusion, and justice. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.